The fateful cut, the dense forest, loomed over the small village of Elmsbrook, its towering trees forming an impenetrable wall of green. Locals whispered tales of the woodland's mysteries. Some called it enchanted. Others believed it was cursed. For generations, woodcutters had ventured in, but never too deep, fearing what lay beyond the familiar paths. Elias, a humble woodcutter, had heard the stories but never paid them much mind. He lived a simple life, earning just enough to feed his ailing wife and their young daughter. His tools were old but well kept, his hands roughened by years of toil. Despite his struggles, he never resorted to deceit or theft. Honesty, he believed, was his greatest virtue. One fateful morning, he ventured into the forest before dawn, the cold mist wrapping around him like ghostly fingers. He walked deeper than usual, seeking sturdier wood that could fetch a better price. The trees here were ancient, their bark twisted and gnarled, their roots gripping the earth like skeletal hands. An unsettling silence blanketed the air. No birds chirped, no leaves rustled. Elias found the perfect tree, a massive oak, its trunk wide enough to take hours of chopping. He set down his sack, wiped the sweat from his brow, and lifted his axe. The first swing echoed through the stillness. A second strike followed, then a third. As the blade sank into the wood, something strange happened. Thick, black sap oozed from the cut, releasing a sickly sweet aroma. The ground beneath him trembled slightly, but he dismissed it as fatigue. Then a chilling voice whispered through the trees, "Why do you wound me, mortal?" Elias froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He turned, expecting to see another villager playing a cruel joke, but there was no one. The voice had come from the tree itself. Swallowing his fear, he took a cautious step back. I mean, no harm. I only seek wood to provide for my family." The tree groaned as if in pain. The sap thickened, dripping like tar. "Not all trees are meant to be felled. You have disturbed something ancient." A sudden gust of wind roared through the forest, though the treetops remained eerily still. Elias's axe slipped from his grasp and landed in the darkness below, a small, unseen pond at the tree's base. He knelt to retrieve it, but the water was unlike any he had ever seen. It was black as ink, and its surface moved as if something was stirring beneath. A shape flickered, a reflection of a figure standing behind him. Spinning around, Elias saw nothing but trees. The silence returned, heavier than before. He shivered, rubbing his arms. Perhaps exhaustion was playing tricks on him. With a deep breath, he turned back to the pond. His axe was gone. A flicker of movement in the water made him recoil. Something else had taken its place, a different axe, a gleaming silver blade with intricate carvings along the handle. It almost seemed to hum with energy. Elias hesitated. He had heard the old folk tale of the woodcutter who had lost his axe in the river and been tested by a spirit. Was this that very legend unfolding before him? A voice, melodic yet laced with something sinister, slithered through the air. "Take the silver axe, woodcutter. It is a gift for one as honest as you." Elias clenched his fists. This was not right. Every fiber of his being told him to walk away. "I cannot accept what is not mine," he said firmly. "I only wish to retrieve my own axe." A deep, rumbling laughter filled the clearing, sending a shiver down his spine. The pond rippled violently, the black water bubbling as if boiling from within. Slowly, something began to rise. Elias stepped back, his breath hitching. A figure emerged, pale, elongated limbs dripping with the inky substance. Its eyes were hollow voids, its mouth stretched too wide into an unnatural grin. Clutched in its clawed hands was his lost axe. "You are different," the creature rasped, tilting its head. "Most would take the silver, but honesty is such a rare thing, and rare things must be preserved." The air turned frigid. The trees trembled, their leaves whispering in unseen voices. Elias knew he had made a mistake. This was no ordinary spirit. He turned to run, but the forest had already changed around him. To be continued. Part 2. The Forest That Hungered. Elias ran. His breath came in ragged gasps, his boots pounding against the damp earth as the towering trees seemed to stretch higher, their gnarled limbs clawing at the sky. The path he had walked just moments before was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar maze of twisted roots and thick, suffocating fog. The thing that had risen from the pond did not follow, at least not in the way Elias expected. Its laughter echoed through the trees, distant yet everywhere at once. The sound slithered through the air like a creeping shadow, curling around his ears and burrowing into his thoughts. Rare things must be preserved. He stumbled, barely catching himself, against the rough bark of a tree. His hands trembled. His axe, his own ordinary, well-worn axe, was gone, still clutched in the hands of that thing. And yet he had resisted temptation. He had done what was right. So why did it feel like he had failed some unseen test? The ground beneath him shifted. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then he felt it again. A slow, deliberate movement, as if something enormous was breathing beneath the soil. The sensation sent ice through his veins. The forest was alive. He needed to get out. Squinting through the fog, he spotted a narrow gap between the trees. He didn't recognize it, but it was the only way forward. He pushed through, branches scraping against his arms like skeletal fingers. The deeper he went, the quieter the forest became. Then he saw them. At first, he thought they were statues, figures standing eerily still among the trees, their bodies wrapped in tattered cloaks. But as he stepped closer, the truth clawed at his stomach. They weren't statues. They were woodcutters, frozen. Their faces were twisted in expressions of fear and agony, their eyes wide and unseeing. Their hands were still mid-swing, as if they had been chopping trees when time simply stopped. Moss had grown over them, roots curling around their limbs, pulling them deeper into the earth. Elias staggered back, bile rising in his throat. This was no ordinary curse. This was a trap. A snap of a twig behind him sent a bolt of terror through his chest. He whirled around, expecting to see the hollow-eyed creature from the pond, but there was nothing, just the thickening fog, pressing against his skin like damp cloth. Then came the whisper, "Do you understand now?" It wasn't just one voice. It was many, overlapping in a sickening harmony. Elias turned in a slow circle, his pulse hammering. "Who's there?" The fog shifted, revealing a figure standing between the trees. It wasn't the creature from before. This was different. It was him, a perfect reflection, his same rough-hewn face, his same tired eyes. But there was something off. This other Elias stood taller, prouder. He held the silver axe, turning it over in his hand as though weighing its worth. "Do you see?" the double said, stepping forward. His voice was Elias's, yet not. It was smoother, almost amused. "You were supposed to take it. The silver axe, the gift." Elias shook his head, his breath shallow. "Number, that wasn't mine. I don't steal what isn't mine." The double chuckled, shaking his head as though Elias were a naive child. "And yet you are still here, Why do you think that is?" Elias clenched his fists. "Because this place is cursed?" The double sighed. "No, Elias, because you are an exception." A sharp gust of wind tore through the trees, and with it came movement. The frozen woodcutters, the ones trapped in the moss and roots, began to shift. Not fully, not freely, just enough to make a sound, a groan, a creak of bones under ancient bark. Others before you took the silver axe. They took the gold axe. They took what was given without question, and the forest took them in return. The double gestured to the trapped figures. "But you refused." Elias's blood turned to ice. He looked at the figures again, really looked. Their faces, their tools. He recognized them. Old woodcutters, men who had gone missing years ago. Stories passed down through generations. The village thought they had been lost to the elements, but they had never left this place. "You mean the axe was a trap?" The double smiled, but it never reached his eyes. The axe was an invitation, a test. The silver axe would have made you stronger, faster, better, but it would have changed you. Those who took it became something else. His gaze darkened. They became part of the forest. A horrible realization clawed at Elias's mind. If he had taken the silver axe, he wouldn't have walked away with a prize. He would have been absorbed into this place, lost, twisted into something no longer human. But I refused. Elias's voice was barely a whisper. The double stepped closer, and this time Elias could see the cracks in him. His skin wasn't skin, it was bark, pulsing with something dark underneath. His fingers twitched, too long, too sharp. "Yes," his smile widened, "which is why the forest wants you even more." A low groan rippled through the trees, and the ground shifted again, this time unmistakably moving. Roots coiled around Elias's feet, dragging him downward. He tried to step back, but they tightened like hungry hands. The woodcutters groaned again, their eyes flickering with something ancient. The double lifted the silver axe, its blade gleaming even in the dim light. "You will take the axe, Elias?" Elias struggled, his breath coming in gasps. The roots climbed higher, wrapping around his waist, his chest. He fought against them, but they were strong, too strong. The double knelt, holding out the silver axe like an offering. "Take it, and you will live,"